Louise Porton. In January 2018, emergency responders in Rugby, England, were called to a residence on Washington Street where Louise Porton reported her daughter Lexi Draper had stopped breathing. Medical teams attempted resuscitation, but the young girl could not be saved. This marked the second time within 2 weeks that Lexi had experienced breathing difficulties requiring hospitalization. On January 2nd and 4th, she had been admitted for similar respiratory issues, though doctors found no underlying medical condition to explain the episodes. Less than 3 weeks later, on February 1st, Porton contacted emergency services again, this time reporting her younger daughter, Scarlett Vaughn, had stopped breathing at a hotel in the town center. Porton claimed she was rushing to the hospital when she pulled over to seek help. But medical examination revealed Scarlett had been without oxygen for an extended period before any emergency call was placed. The timing of these incidents, combined with Porton's delayed responses in seeking immediate medical attention, prompted investigators to examine both incidents more closely. Detective work revealed a pattern that raised immediate concerns. In the days before Lexi's passing, Porton had conducted internet searches about sudden death and specific medical emergencies involving young people. Phone records showed she had been actively engaged in personal activities and communications during the hours when her daughters needed care. On the night Scarlett was found unresponsive, Porton had delayed calling for help for approximately 90 minutes while the situation became increasingly critical. Forensic pathologists conducted detailed examinations that proved crucial to the investigation. In Lexi's case, medical evidence indicated she had been prevented from breathing on multiple occasions, causing the earlier hospital admissions. The final incident involved deliberate obstruction of her airway. Scarlett's examination revealed blood evidence on bedding materials in the hotel room, and forensic analysis showed she had experienced neck compression in addition to airway obstruction. Investigators discovered that Porton's lifestyle had been significantly impacted by parenting responsibilities. Phone records and witness statements indicated she viewed her daughters as obstacles to her social activities. On multiple occasions leading up to the incidents, she had expressed frustration about the time required for their care. The night Scarlett passed away, Porton had been at the hotel for reasons unrelated to family needs, and evidence suggested she became irritated when childcare interfered with her plans. The trial at Birmingham Crown Court in 2019 presented extensive forensic evidence and testimony from medical experts. Prosecutors demonstrated that Porton had deliberately caused the breathing difficulties that led to both deaths. The pattern of prior hospital visits, combined with the internet searches and delayed emergency calls, painted a clear picture of premeditation. Text messages recovered from her phone showed she had been preoccupied with personal relationships rather than the welfare of her daughters. During sentencing, Justice Yip described the offenses as calculated and carried out in cold blood. The court heard impact statements from family members who described Lexi and Scarlett as joyful and loving. Porton showed no visible emotion during the proceedings and maintained her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. She received a life sentence with a minimum term of 32 years before becoming eligible for parole consideration, which places her earliest possible release date around 2051. Porton remains incarcerated in a facility in England, where she continues to serve her sentence. Prison records indicate she has maintained her innocence in conversations with other inmates, despite the jury's unanimous verdict. But another case would reveal an even more complex situation involving mental health questions and legal debates about responsibility. Madison McDonald. On April 5, 2021, Madison McDonald entered the Irving Police Department lobby and used the front desk phone to confess that she had harmed her 2 daughters. Officers were dispatched to her apartment afterward, where they uncovered the scene that would go on to shape one of Texas's most contested criminal cases. By the time police reached the residence, MacDonald was already detained at the station, not present at the scene. MacDonald explained to investigators that she had been experiencing severe paranoia regarding the fathers of her daughters. She told police she believed both men posed threats and that she needed to protect the youngsters from perceived danger. According to her account, she had administered sedatives to both girls before taking further action to ensure they would be safe from what she described as imminent harm. Her statements were recorded and would later become critical evidence during legal proceedings. The investigation revealed MacDonald had a documented history of mental health concerns. Hospital records showed multiple admissions for psychiatric evaluation, with diagnoses including severe paranoid ideation and possible dissociative symptoms. Medical professionals who had treated her testified that she exhibited signs of believing in alternate identities and experienced delusions about threats to her family. These records became the foundation of her defense strategy. Forensic analysis confirmed the presence of sedatives in the systems of both victims. Toxicology reports indicated they had been given medication before the fatal incidents, suggesting premeditation in the administration of these substances. The medical examiner determined both girls had been prevented from breathing after being sedated, and the timeline established by investigators showed MacDonald had taken deliberate steps in sequence. The legal proceedings centered heavily on the question of criminal responsibility, given MacDonald's mental state. Defense attorneys presented extensive psychiatric testimony, arguing she lacked the capacity to understand her actions were wrong. Multiple mental health experts testified about her delusional belief system and how her paranoia had reached levels that distorted her perception of reality. They argued she genuinely believed she was protecting her daughters from harm. Prosecutors countered with their own psychiatric experts who acknowledged MacDonald's mental illness, but testified she retained enough awareness to comprehend that taking her daughters' lives was wrong. Dr. Christy Compton, a forensic psychiatrist, testified that despite her paranoid delusions, MacDonald demonstrated awareness of societal and legal boundaries. He pointed to her ability to plan the sedation, her immediate confession to police, and her understanding of the finality of her actions as evidence of criminal culpability. The jury deliberated for several days before returning guilty verdicts on capital offenses charges. MacDonald was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on April 19, 2023, immediately after the jury returned a guilty verdict. Her defense team filed appeals, arguing the verdict should be overturned due to insufficient consideration of her mental health evidence. But in November 2024, the Texas Court of Appeals upheld the conviction. MacDonald remains confined in a Texas correctional facility where she has access to mental health services. While mental health played a central role in that case, the next situation would involve an entirely different set of circumstances driven by relationship dynamics. Brittany Gosney. The disappearance of James Hutchinson from Preble County, Ohio, in February 2021 initially appeared to be a standard missing person case. Brittany Gosney reported to Middletown police that her son had vanished from a park where they had gone for an outing. She provided descriptions to officers and expressed concern about his whereabouts, prompting an immediate search operation involving multiple law enforcement agencies and community volunteers. As investigators interviewed Gosney over the following hours, inconsistencies emerged in her timeline and descriptions of events. Detective John Rollins conducted an extensive interrogation that ultimately led to a full confession. During the recorded interview, Gosney broke down and admitted that James had not disappeared from a park. Instead, she revealed that the incident had occurred days earlier at a different location and under very different circumstances. According to her confession, Gosney drove to Rush Run Wildlife Area with James and his siblings. She told investigators she intended to leave him there, and when he attempted to hold on to the vehicle, she drove forward, causing him to fall and sustain fatal injuries. She then placed his body in the vehicle and drove to various locations before ultimately disposing of his remains in the Ohio River. The confession included specific details about locations and timing that investigators were able to verify. Background investigation revealed Gosney had been experiencing pressure regarding her parenting situation. She was in a relationship with James Hamilton, who had expressed frustration about the demands of caring for 3 youngsters. Messages recovered from phones showed Hamilton had made comments about preferring not to have the responsibility of parenting. And Gosney later stated she felt overwhelmed by the conflicting demands of her relationship and her role as a parent. Court documents revealed Gosney had previously attempted to place James in care arrangements outside her home. Records showed she had contacted multiple agencies, expressing inability to manage his care, citing behavioral challenges and her own emotional capacity. These attempts had not resulted in alternate placement, leaving her feeling trapped between incompatible obligations. The search for James's remains involved extensive operations along the Ohio River. Recovery teams from multiple counties coordinated efforts, but the river's current and depth made location extremely difficult. Despite weeks of searching with specialized equipment, his body was never recovered. The absence of physical remains created legal challenges, but did not prevent prosecution based on Gosney's detailed confession and corroborating evidence. Hamilton was also charged in connection with the case for his role in helping dispose of evidence and failing to report the incident to authorities. He received a separate sentence for his involvement, though prosecutors determined Gosney bore primary responsibility for James's demise. During the interrogation footage that was later released, Gosney repeatedly stated she had felt under pressure and didn't know what else to do. She expressed remorse, but acknowledged she had made a series of deliberate choices. The video shows Detective Hollingsworth methodically dismantling her initial false statements while maintaining a professional demeanor designed to elicit truthful responses. Gosney pleaded guilty to numerous charges and was sentenced to 21 years to life in prison in September 2021. She will be eligible for parole consideration after serving the minimum sentence. James Hamilton received a 19-year prison sentence, the highest term allowed for his charges of kidnapping, improper handling of remains, and endangering. Gosney is currently serving her sentence at an Ohio correctional facility. The next case would shift from relationship pressure to a situation where 3 young lives were taken in Arizona under circumstances that remain difficult for investigators to fully understand. Rachel Henry. In the early morning hours of January 20th, 2020, police in Phoenix, Arizona responded to a residence where Rachel Henry had called reporting an emergency. When officers arrived, they discovered 3 youngsters unresponsive in a bedroom. Despite immediate medical intervention, none could be revived. Henry was present at the scene and immediately admitted responsibility for what had occurred. During initial questioning, Henry provided a detailed account to detectives. She explained that she had prevented each from breathing while singing lullabies to them. Her statement was methodical and clear, with specific details about the sequence of events and the timing involved. She expressed that she believed she was acting in their best interest, though her reasoning remained unclear to investigators and would later become a central question during legal proceedings. The background investigation painted a picture of a family experiencing significant hardship. Henry and her family had been experiencing housing instability and financial strain. They had been staying in temporary accommodations and struggling with basic necessities. Friends and family members interviewed by police described Henry as devoted to her youngsters but overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Medical examination confirmed Henry's account of the method used. The forensic pathologist determined all 3 had been prevented from breathing, and there was no evidence of any other contributing factors. The medical evidence aligned precisely with Henry's confession, eliminating any question about what had physically occurred. The investigation focused instead on understanding what had led to her actions. mental health professionals became involved in evaluating Henry's state of mind. Psychological assessments were conducted to determine whether she had been experiencing a psychiatric crisis. While evaluators found evidence of depression and stress related to her circumstances, they did not identify active psychosis or delusions that would have prevented her from understanding her actions. The evaluations suggested she had been experiencing hopelessness but maintained awareness of what she was doing. The legal proceedings were relatively brief given Henry's immediate confession and cooperation with authorities. She entered guilty pleas to multiple counts, eliminating the need for a trial. Her defense attorneys argued for consideration of her mental health struggles and the extreme poverty that had surrounded the family, suggesting these factors had contributed to a breaking point. In February 2025, Henry was sentenced to natural life imprisonment. The complexity of that case would pale in comparison to what was unfolding in Idaho, where investigators would discover a situation involving multiple deaths and beliefs that seemed impossible to comprehend. Lori Vallow Daybell. The case that would eventually ensnare Lori Vallow Daybell began drawing national attention in November 2019, when relatives in Louisiana reported they had not heard from two youngsters, Joshua Vallow and Tylee Ryan, in several months. When police in Rexburg, Idaho conducted a welfare check, Vallow provided evasive answers about the whereabouts of the two, claiming they were staying with friends. When pressed for specific information, she and her new husband, Chad Daybell, suddenly left Idaho, fleeing to Hawaii. The investigation rapidly expanded as detectives uncovered a trail of suspicious circumstances and deaths surrounding Vallow and Daybell. Authorities learned that Vallow's previous husband, Charles Vallow, had been shot and fatally wounded in July 2019 by Vallow's brother, Alex Cox, in what was initially classified as self-defense. Additionally, Chad Daybell's previous wife, Tammy Daybell, had suddenly passed away in October 2019, just weeks before he married Vallow. The proximity of these deaths to Vallow and Daybell's relationship raised immediate red flags. The search for the missing youngsters became one of the most intensive missing person investigations in Idaho history. Hundreds of law enforcement personnel, FBI agents, and volunteers participated in searches across multiple states. The case gained massive media attention as details emerged about Vallow and Daybell's unusual belief system, which centered on end times prophecies and the classification of people as light or dark spirits. In June 2020, investigators executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's property in rural Idaho. Human remains were discovered buried on the property, later identified through DNA analysis as belonging to Joshua Vallow and Tylee Ryan. The condition and location of the remains indicated they had been there for months, roughly coinciding with the time family members had last heard from them. Daybell was arrested immediately, and Vallow, who had been in custody on related charges, faced upgraded charges. The investigation revealed a complex belief system that appeared to have motivated the events. Text messages and journal entries showed Vallow and Daybell believed certain people were possessed by dark spirits or zombies that needed to be eliminated. According to these writings, they saw themselves as important figures in preparing for an imminent apocalypse. Former friends testified that the couple had become increasingly isolated and radical in their religious interpretations. Financial motives also emerged during the investigation. Joshua Vallow was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy, and investigators found that Vallow had continued collecting Social Security benefits for both youngsters after their deaths. Additionally, Charles Vallow's life insurance policy had been changed to name Vallow as beneficiary shortly before his demise, though the insurance company ultimately denied the claim due to suspicious circumstances. The legal proceedings were complicated by questions about Vallow's mental competency. She was initially found unfit to stand trial and underwent psychiatric treatment, though she was later deemed restored to competency. During an interview before her trial, she maintained that she was fighting for her life and expressed confidence that her belief system would be understood. In May 2023, after weeks of testimony, including forensic evidence, text messages, and witness accounts, Vallow was convicted on multiple counts related to the deaths of Joshua, Tylee, and conspiring in Tammy Daybell's demise. She received consecutive life sentences without parole possibility in Idaho. In December 2024, she received additional life sentences in Arizona for her role in the conspiracy that resulted in Charles Vallow's death. Chad Daybell faced separate proceedings and was also convicted, receiving a death sentence for his role in the 3 deaths. Vallow remains incarcerated in Idaho, where she continues to express her religious beliefs to other inmates. From belief-driven actions, the next case would bring us to England, where a different kind of family secret would lead to an unspeakable outcome. Sarah Barras. In May 2019, emergency services in Sheffield, England, responded to a report of 2 teenagers found unresponsive in a home on Gregg House Road. Despite immediate medical response, both were pronounced deceased at the scene. The initial investigation appeared to be a tragic, unexplained incident until detectives began interviewing the mother, Sarah Barras, and her partner, Brandon Machine. During questioning, both Barras and Machine confessed to involvement in the deaths, but the full scope of what had occurred only became clear as detectives pieced together the evidence. The teenagers, Tristan and Blake Barras, had been strangled after an earlier attempt to poison them had failed. Investigation revealed that Barras had administered tablets intended to be fatal. But when that method proved unsuccessful, she and Machine resorted to manual strangulation. What made this case particularly disturbing was the revelation of the relationship between Barras and Machine. Genetic testing confirmed that Machine was actually Barras's half-brother, and he was the biological father of all 6 of her offspring. The incestuous relationship had remained hidden from most family members and authorities for years, creating a situation where Barras felt increasingly trapped. Investigators learned that the 4 younger siblings had survived the poisoning attempt. Forensic analysis confirmed traces of medication in their systems, though they had not ingested fatal amounts. After the teenagers were found deceased, social services immediately removed the 4 younger ones from the home and placed them in protective care. Medical examinations confirmed they were physically unharmed beyond the effects of the medication. The motive behind the acts emerged through interviews and examination of communications. Barras told investigators she had become terrified that social services would discover the incestuous relationship and remove all her offspring permanently. She expressed a belief that she would rather they not exist than be taken away and placed in care. Phone records showed she had been researching how to end lives without detection in the days leading up to the acts. Witness testimony revealed that Barras had been showing signs of increasing stress and isolation. Neighbors reported hearing arguments and seeing the family less frequently in public. School officials noted the teenagers had been increasingly absent, though there were no formal welfare referrals made before the tragedy occurred. The trial at Sheffield Crown Court in November 2019 heard extensive evidence about the planning involved. Prosecutors presented search history, witness statements, and forensic evidence showing deliberate preparation. Both Barras and Machine pleaded guilty to multiple charges, eliminating the need for a full trial, but resulting in detailed sentencing hearings where the full facts were presented. Mr. Justice Goss, who also presided over the Porton case, described the offenses as chilling and beyond comprehension. She noted that while Barras may have felt trapped by circumstances, the choice to take her sons' lives rather than face separation demonstrated a profound selfishness. The judge emphasized that many parents face difficult situations without resorting to harming their offspring. Sarah Barris and Brandon Machine were both given whole-life orders for the murders of Tristan and Blake, meaning they are not eligible for parole and are expected to spend the rest of their natural lives in prison unless a reduction is granted on appeal or by the Justice Secretary. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The tragedy in England would soon be mirrored by an equally devastating case in Germany, where family dynamics would unravel in an unexpected way. Christiane K. On September 3, 2020, emergency services in Solingen, Germany responded to a report at the main train station where a woman had contacted authorities stating she had harmed her offspring at her apartment. Police immediately dispatched units to the residence in the Hasseldell district, where they discovered 5 youngsters who had been deceased for several hours. The scene shocked even experienced investigators, as the methodical nature of what had occurred became apparent through initial examination. Christiane K., a 27-year-old mother, had sent a message to her former partner and the grandmother of one of the youngsters before contacting police. The message stated she had taken the lives of the 5 at the apartment and expressed remorse for her actions. The message provided specific details that confirmed authorities were responding to a genuine emergency rather than a false alarm or mental health crisis without foundation. Investigation revealed the events had unfolded following a recent separation from her partner. Christiane K. had been in a relationship that ended shortly before the incident, and witness statements indicated she had been experiencing distress about the breakup. Friends and family interviewed by police described her as devoted but struggling with the relationship's end. Forensic examination revealed a carefully planned sequence of events. Medical examiners determined that Christiane K. had administered sedatives to each youngster before taking further action. Toxicology reports confirmed the presence of medication that would have rendered them unconscious, indicating premeditation. The methods used varied slightly, with forensic evidence suggesting some had been prevented from breathing while others had been submerged in water while sedated. The apartment bathroom became a focal point of the investigation, where physical evidence corroborated the sequence of events Christiane K. described in her confession. The timing indicated the entire series of events had occurred over several hours during the day. One youngster survived the incident. The eldest had been at the grandmother's home when the events occurred, sparing that individual from the tragedy. This circumstance allowed investigators to understand family dynamics through interviews with the surviving sibling, who provided context about the household environment and recent changes following the separation. German authorities conducted extensive interviews with Christiane K. following her arrest. She explained that after the breakup, she felt overwhelmed and believed ending the youngsters' lives was preferable to them experiencing life without both parents together. Her statements reflected a distorted perspective on parenting and family structure, viewing the separation as an insurmountable obstacle rather than a manageable life change. Psychiatric evaluations were conducted to assess her mental state at the time of the offenses. Mental health professionals diagnosed her with a personality disorder, but determined she had been capable of understanding her actions. The evaluations concluded that while she had been experiencing emotional distress, she retained the capacity to make deliberate choices and comprehend the consequences of those choices. The trial at the Wuppertal District Court in November 2021 heard extensive testimony from forensic experts, psychiatric professionals, and family members. The prosecution presented evidence showing Christiane K. had researched methods online and obtained the sedatives deliberately for the purpose of carrying out her plan. Digital forensics revealed searches conducted in the days before the incident that demonstrated her intentions. Judge Jochen Kutter sentenced Christiane K. to life imprisonment under German law. with the additional designation of particular severity of guilt, which significantly reduces the possibility of early release consideration. Under this designation, she cannot be considered for parole until serving at least 15 years, with the likelihood of remaining incarcerated far longer. Christiane K. remains incarcerated in a German correctional facility. The next case would take us back to the United States, where investigators in Colorado would uncover a web of deception surrounding a missing stepson. Letitia Stauch. On January 27, 2020, Letitia Stauch reported her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon, had left their home in Lorson Ranch, Colorado Springs, and failed to return. She told authorities Gannon had walked to a friend's house between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, but never arrived. The report triggered an immediate search operation involving El Paso County Sheriff's Office, community volunteers, and eventually the FBI. Stauch provided multiple accounts of Gannon's disappearance during interviews with investigators. She claimed he had been playing with friends, running away, or had been taken by an unknown individual. The shifting narratives raised immediate suspicion among detectives, who began to scrutinize her statements more carefully. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera became a crucial piece of evidence, showing Gannon getting into Stauch's vehicle on the day of his disappearance, but never returning. As the investigation progressed, forensic teams examined the family home. Blood evidence was discovered in Gannon's bedroom, including on carpet and other surfaces. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Gannon, and the volume indicated he had sustained serious injuries in that location. Additional evidence suggested attempts had been made to clean the scene, with luminol testing revealing blood traces that had been wiped away. Digital forensics uncovered internet searches on devices associated with Stauch. Searches included queries about blood removal, weapon disposal, and whether cadaver dogs could detect remains under specific conditions. The timing of these searches aligned with the period immediately after Gannon's disappearance, strongly suggesting involvement in covering up what had occurred. In early March 2020, Gannon's body was discovered in a suitcase under a bridge in Pace, Florida, approximately 1,300 miles from Colorado Springs. Forensic examination revealed he had sustained multiple injuries from different sources, including stab wounds, a gunshot wound, and blunt force trauma. The medical examiner determined the combination of injuries would have been fatal, and evidence suggested the various methods had been used over a period of time. Investigation into Stauch's movements revealed she had traveled to Florida in early February, renting a vehicle and driving cross-country. Rental car records, toll receipts, and surveillance footage tracked her route from Colorado to Florida. Cell phone data placed her in the vicinity where Gannon's body was ultimately found, and forensic analysis of the rental vehicle revealed traces consistent with transporting remains. The relationship between Stauch and Gannon had reportedly been strained. Interviews with family members and school personnel indicated there had been ongoing tension in the household. Gannon's biological mother, who lived in South Carolina, had been engaged in custody discussions with Gannon's father. Stauch was arrested in South Carolina and extradited to Colorado to face charges. Her defense team pursued an insanity defense, arguing she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Psychiatric evaluations were conducted by multiple experts, with defense psychiatrists testifying about her claimed alternate personalities. Prosecution psychiatrists testified that Stauch's behavior demonstrated clear awareness and intentional deception, pointing to the elaborate cover-up efforts as evidence of calculated actions. The trial in Colorado Springs in April and May 2023 included extensive forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and expert testimony, including psychiatric evaluations regarding Stauch's claimed dissociative identity disorder. The jury deliberated for approximately 6 hours before rejecting the insanity defense and returning guilty verdicts on all counts, including first-degree murder and tampering with a deceased human body. The relatively quick deliberation suggested the jurors found the evidence overwhelming. Stouch received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring she will spend the remainder of her life in custody. She showed minimal emotion during sentencing and declined to make a statement. She is currently incarcerated at a Colorado facility and has filed appeals challenging the verdict. While that case involved elaborate deception and a cross-country cover-up, another woman in Missouri would demonstrate how insurance fraud could escalate to targeted harm. Pam Hupp. The case involving Pam Hupp spans multiple incidents and remains partially unresolved, though her conviction in one matter and pending charges in another have established a pattern of calculated behavior. In December 2011, Betsy Faria was found deceased in her Troy, Missouri home with multiple stab wounds. Her husband Russell Faria discovered her body and immediately became the primary suspect in what investigators initially viewed as a domestic situation. Russell Faria was convicted of his wife's ending in 2013 and sentenced to life imprisonment. The conviction relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and the timeline of events that evening. However, significant questions arose about the investigation's focus on Russell while overlooking evidence pointing to other potential suspects, particularly regarding Pam Hupp, who had been the last person to see Betsy alive. Hupp had been a close friend of Betsy Faria and had driven her to chemotherapy appointments during her treatment. Just days before Betsy's passing, she had changed the beneficiary on her life insurance policy from her husband to Pam Hupp, receiving insufficient attention during the initial investigation. The policy was worth $150,000, and Hupp collected the full amount. Russell Faria's defense team uncovered evidence that had been overlooked or dismissed by prosecutors. Cell phone records, witness statements, and timeline analysis demonstrated Russell had been at a friend's home playing games at the time Betsy was harmed. Multiple witnesses corroborated his alibi. His conviction was overturned in 2015, and charges were eventually dismissed. As attention shifted toward Hupp, investigators discovered suspicious circumstances. In 2013, Hupp's mother passed away after a fall, with Hupp as the beneficiary of her estate. The case was reopened years later as investigators recognized potential patterns. The definitive evidence against Hupp came in August 2016, when Louis Gumpenberger was shot and killed in her home in O'Fallon, Missouri. Hupp claimed Gumpenberger had broken into her residence and she had shot him in self-defense. However, investigation revealed a meticulously planned scheme that unraveled under scrutiny. Detectives discovered that Hupp had contacted Gumpenberger under false pretenses, offering him money to participate in what she described as a reenactment for a television program. She provided him with a note she had written that implicated Russell Faria in a supposed plot, intending to make it appear Gumpenberger had been sent to harm her on Russell's behalf. The elaborate setup was designed to support her previous testimony about Russell's guilt and discredit the overturned conviction. Forensic analysis of the scene contradicted Hupp's self-defense claims. Evidence showed Gumpenberger had been shot multiple times while likely already incapacitated, and the positioning of evidence appeared staged. The note found on him was in Hupp's handwriting, and phone records showed she had been the one to contact him before he arrived at her residence. Hupp entered an Alford plea to first-degree charges in the Gumpenberger case in June 2019, allowing her to maintain her innocence while acknowledging sufficient evidence existed for conviction. She received a life sentence without parole possibility. Following Hupp's conviction, Lincoln County prosecutors filed charges against her for the ending of Betsy Faria. In June 2025, she was formally charged with first-degree offense in Betsy's 2011 demise. Additional perjury charges were filed related to testimony during Russell Faria's trial. where she had made false statements under oath. The investigation into Shirley Newman's demise remains ongoing, with authorities examining whether the fall was truly accidental. Hupp's financial benefit, combined with patterns in other cases, has prompted reconsideration of the original ruling. Hupp has been fighting to retain her prison wages, arguing against payments to Betsy Faria's family. She is scheduled to face trial for Betsy Faria's ending in 2026. Hupp remains incarcerated in Missouri. From calculated financial schemes, the next case would reveal a household where suffering occurred over an extended period without intervention. Mitchell Blair. In March 2015, Wayne County officials in Detroit, Michigan, were conducting an eviction at an apartment on Lillibridge Street when they made a horrifying discovery inside a freezer. The bodies of two youngsters were found frozen in the unit, wrapped in plastic bags and positioned in a manner suggesting they had been there for an extended time. The discovery occurred in the presence of Mitchell Blair's two other living offspring, who had been residing in the apartment while their siblings' remains were kept in the freezer. Initial investigation quickly established that the deceased youngsters had been in the freezer since 2012 and 2013, respectively. Medical examination revealed both had sustained severe injuries over time, indicating prolonged mistreatment before their deaths. The condition of the remains and forensic analysis provided investigators with a timeline of events spanning several years. Blair immediately admitted to causing the deaths when confronted by police. She claimed she had learned the youngsters were engaged in inappropriate behavior with each other, and she believed this justified her actions. Her statements described extensive physical punishment that escalated over time, including restraining them, denying them food, and subjecting them to repeated beatings. She stated she felt her actions were appropriate discipline. Investigators interviewed the two surviving offspring, who provided accounts of the household environment and what they had witnessed. The survivors described an atmosphere of fear and control, where they had been forbidden from discussing their missing siblings with anyone outside the home. They explained they had been threatened with similar consequences if they disobeyed or revealed what had occurred in the apartment. Forensic pathologists determined the causes of the fatalities. Evidence showed both youngsters had been subjected to repeated trauma over extended periods, including beating with objects, being denied necessities, and being restrained in ways that caused physical harm. The medical examiner concluded both had ultimately succumbed to the cumulative effects of mistreatment combined with specific injuries in their final moments. The investigation revealed numerous missed opportunities for intervention. School records showed extended absences for the deceased youngsters before they disappeared entirely, but no welfare checks had been conducted despite the patterns. Neighbors reported hearing disturbances but had not contacted authorities with specific concerns about the welfare of those in the home. The case highlighted failures in multiple systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Blair showed no remorse during police interviews or court proceedings. In a recorded interview that was later made public, she stated she would take the same actions again, expressing belief that what she described as their behavior justified any response she chose. Her complete lack of acknowledgement that she had done anything wrong disturbed investigators and legal professionals involved in the case. Mental health evaluations were conducted to assess her fitness to stand trial and her state of mind during the events. Psychiatrists determined Blair was competent to face charges and had been aware her actions were illegal, evidenced by her efforts to conceal what had occurred. While evaluators noted personality disorders, they concluded these did not prevent her from understanding right from wrong or the consequences of her behavior. Blair pleaded guilty to avoid a trial in June 2015 and received a life sentence without parole possibility. Blair remains incarcerated in Michigan. Another situation involving prolonged suffering would emerge in Ohio, where investigators would confront evidence of extensive ongoing harm. Sierra Day. In March 2018, medical personnel at Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland, Ohio, treated a youngster brought in by family members with severe medical conditions. The physical state of the individual immediately raised concerns among healthcare providers, who observed signs of prolonged deprivation and recent trauma. Hospital staff contacted Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services and Cleveland Police, triggering an investigation into the household environment. Medical examination revealed extensive evidence of sustained mistreatment. Investigation focused on Sierra Day and her boyfriend, Deontay Lewis, both of whom had been primary caregivers. Interviews and evidence gathered from the residents revealed a pattern of intentional deprivation and punishment. Forensic analysis of the home environment corroborated medical findings about the conditions the youngster had been subjected to on a regular basis. The biological father, who had been engaged in custody proceedings, spoke to media after the discovery. He stated he had repeatedly raised concerns to child services about the welfare of his offspring, including documentation of visible injuries during visitation exchanges. Records showed multiple reports had been filed with authorities expressing worry about the living situation. But no substantive intervention had occurred before the final hospitalization. A wrongful ending lawsuit filed against Cuyahoga County outlined a history of reports and failed interventions. The legal filing detailed specific instances where caseworkers had been notified of concerns but failed to conduct thorough investigations or remove the youngster from the environment. Documentation showed at least 8 separate contacts with child services over a 2-year period, none of which resulted in protective action. Both Day and Lewis were charged with numerous offenses related to the mistreatment and ultimate demise. The prosecution presented medical evidence, witness testimony, and documentation of the systematic nature of what had occurred. Healthcare providers testified about the extent of injuries and the timeline required for such conditions to develop, establishing that the situation had persisted for months or longer. Defense attorneys for both defendants attempted to argue their respective clients bore less responsibility than the other, with each side suggesting the co-defendant had been the primary aggressor. However, evidence demonstrated both had been present and active in the household throughout the period when the mistreatment occurred, making both culpable under the law. Sierra Day pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and other charges and was sentenced in October 2019 to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. Deontay Lewis pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, endangerment, and involuntary manslaughter, and received a sentence of 22 years to life. Day and Lewis are serving their sentences in separate Ohio facilities. The wrongful ending lawsuit against the county was settled confidentially, though the terms of the settlement have not been publicly disclosed. While that case exposed failures in protective systems, our final case would demonstrate how deception could continue, even as investigators closed in. Leilani Simon. In October 2022, Chatham County Police in Georgia initiated a missing person investigation when 20-month-old Quentin Simon was reported as not being in his home. His mother, Leilani Simon, told authorities she had last seen him in his playpen early that morning, but discovered him missing when she checked on him later. The report triggered an immediate search involving local law enforcement, FBI, and community volunteers. As investigators interviewed Simon and other household members, inconsistencies emerged in the timeline and accounts of that morning. Authorities learned Simon had a history of substance use and had been facing various personal challenges. Witnesses reported observing concerning behavior and instability in the household in the weeks before Quentin's disappearance. Background checks revealed prior involvement with child services, though Quentin had remained in the home. The investigation took a significant turn when evidence suggested Quentin had not left the residence. Search warrant executions revealed biological evidence indicating something had happened to Quentin inside the residence. Forensic teams conducted extensive processing of multiple rooms. In November 2022, police conducted a massive search operation at a landfill in Chatham County. After weeks of searching through tons of material, human remains were located and confirmed through DNA analysis to be Quinton. Forensic examination of the recovered remains revealed Quinton had sustained blunt force trauma. The medical examiner determined the injuries would have been fatal. Though the advanced state of decomposition and exposure to landfill conditions complicated the establishment of additional specific details, the location and condition of the remains confirmed he had been deceased since the time of the initial missing person report. Simon was arrested and charged with numerous offenses, including intentional harm, concealing a demise, and making false statements to investigators. During police interviews, she maintained various explanations for Quinton's disappearance, changing her account multiple times as investigators presented evidence contradicting her statements. The interviews demonstrated her awareness of the investigation's progress and attempts to adjust her narrative accordingly. The trial in Chatham County in October 2024 featured testimony from forensic experts, law enforcement personnel, and individuals who had interacted with Simon. The trial concluded with a verdict in late October 2024. Defense attorneys argued that the prosecution had not definitively established what happened or proven beyond doubt that Simon was responsible. They questioned the chain of custody for evidence and suggested alternative explanations. The jury found Simon guilty on all counts after deliberating. In November 2024, Judge Tammy Stokes of Chatham County Superior Court sentenced her to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum term. The sentence reflected Georgia's sentencing guidelines and the specific circumstances of the conviction. Family members provided victim impact statements at sentencing, with Quinton's biological father and other relatives describing the impact of his loss. They spoke about his personality and the joy he brought to their lives during his brief time with the family. Several relatives expressed anger at Simon's deception and the extended period during which she maintained false narratives. In January 2025, Simon filed motions for a new trial, arguing various grounds, including alleged errors in evidence presentation and jury instructions. The motions are pending review, with hearings scheduled to address the arguments raised by her defense team. She remains incarcerated in Georgia while the post-conviction proceedings continue. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.